Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at another low-cost smartphone. This is called the Apollo Lite, and it's from a company called Vernee, and you can get this for around $215 or so. Pretty nicely performing phone, actually, for the money, and we're going to be taking a closer look at it in just a second. But I do want to mention, in the interest of full disclosure, that this came in free of charge from GearBest.com. However, all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. No one is reviewing this content before it is posted, and no one's paying for this review either. And because this came in from GearBest and not from the manufacturer, we've had no direct communication with the manufacturer of this phone either. So let's get into what we've got here, and then we'll see how it performs. 5.5-inch full HD 1080p display. It feels smaller in my hand than the iPhone 6 Plus does, which also has a same size display. So I think the bezels on this are a lot thinner, and it's also a little lighter too. It's actually more comfortable to hold, despite the fact that it's got the same size screen as that bigger iPhone does. IPS display, 5-point touch. It's got the Gorilla Glass on there. They've also put on a screen protector for you that is applied when you get it. It's got a Helio X20 Deca-core processor, an ARM Mali T880 GPU on this one, 4 gigabytes of RAM and 32 gigabytes of storage, and there is a compact flash option as well. Go through some of the exterior features on here. You've got your power button and your volume rocker over there. And on the side here, it's got 2 SIM card slots, but if you want to use an SD card, you'll have to sacrifice one of the SIM cards. So you can effectively have 1 SIM card and an SD card, or 2 SIM cards and no SD card if you want to do that. On the back here, of course, you've got a camera. This is a 16 megapixel Samsung camera. The only issue I'm seeing with it is that it's not recording video at the frame rates and resolutions that they specify in their specifications. So on their website, it says it can shoot at 4K and as well as 1080p at 60 frames per second. The best I could get out of it is 30 frames per second at 1080, but the video does look pretty nice for the price. I've seen other $200 smartphones and even some that cost more than $200 that did not have the video output quality I'm seeing on this one. You can see a rainy day here at my house. Looks okay. It's not the best video quality out there. Most of these phones aren't good video shooters, but it is better than the blue phone we looked at a couple of weeks ago that also had a similar camera. The still photos are okay on it also. I did find when you have fast-moving subjects, it's having a hard time keeping them sharp and in focus, so the focus is slightly slower on it, but good enough, I think, for the price, and you can see some image samples of what we have on there. We also have a fingerprint sensor here on the back, so let me just switch the phone off, and I'll show you how all of this works. We'll switch around to my 2-up camera view here. I'll do a switcheroo, and what you do here is just rest your finger on the sensor, and it will then pop back up for you. Pretty quick on the fly on that. The only issue I'm finding with it is that I get a lot of misreads on it, and oftentimes I'm just glancing by it by accident, just picking up the phone, and then that might register enough false attempts at getting into the phone, and then it locks it out completely, and then you can't get back into it until you put your password in. So it's not the best fingerprint sensor, not always that accurate, but it is on there and it does work. And on the bottom here, you've got a USB Type-C connector for charging. It supports fast charging, but through a format called Pump Express 3.0. I haven't heard of that before, but it is on this phone. It does charge the phone as fast as other fast charging technologies do, but just be prepared, it will not work with Qualcomm fast charging devices that might be out there. So you will be somewhat proprietary on this one, at least as something that's compatible with Pump Express. I also had an issue that the power adapter that was in the box does not work with my US outlets here without an adapter. So you may need to put that adapter in your shopping cart when you go to buy this thing, or just make sure that whatever version you get has the US version of the plug. And on that note, in the United States here, those of us on Verizon or Sprint cannot use this phone on our networks either at the moment. So that is another thing to just keep in mind when you are shopping. This is mostly a T-Mobile and AT&T phone here in the United States, as well as some of the other carriers that run on those networks. Battery life is good and on par with what I've seen on other smartphones with similar capacity batteries. I believe this is a 3100 milliamp hour battery. It should get you through the day, provided you're not gaming too hard on it or watching too many videos. The speaker on the bottom is not good. It is not stereo, and it's very tinny and really not all that great. It's probably the worst sounding speaker I have heard on a smartphone in quite some time, so I would suggest plugging in some headphones, because there is a headphone jack on the top of the phone here. It does not give you a headset in the box, but it will work with just about any cell phone headset that's out there. And one last thing, there is a 5-megapixel selfie camera on the front, and you can just do the peace sign here, and it will There we go. Take a photo for you with the selfie camera on the front with a countdown timer. So lots of cool stuff on this phone, good price, and now let's see how it performs. Now the phone is running with what feels like a very stock version of Android 6.0 Marshmallow. There doesn't seem to be any real changes to the UI on here. In fact, it was a very barren experience when I first booted it up. There wasn't any apps really installed at all. Even the Google apps weren't on there. The Google Play Store, of course, is on, and I was able to install the apps that I wanted to get on from there. And I actually welcome that because I like to be able to choose what's on my phone versus having a manufacturer or a carrier choose for me. So that was a nice thing to see on there. We'll pop open the YouTube app real quick. One thing I'm noticing though is that it doesn't do 1080p 60 video. So right now I've got a 1080p 60 video from my YouTube channel, and the best it's giving me here is 720p at 60 frames per second. The 30 frames per second 1080p stuff does play at 1080p, but not the 60 frames per second stuff. So if you are looking for 60 frames per second playback from YouTube, you probably will not see it on this phone initially. We'll have to play around with a few other services later and see what does get supported there. Gaming is pretty nice on the phone, actually. We'll load up Goat Simulator, which is our go-to little benchmarking game here, and it really has a pretty good response to it. It feels about where I've seen other mid-range phones perform, which sometimes cost a little more, so it is a pretty good gaming experience overall, and I think most of the Android library will function quite well on here, including some emulators. I don't think you'll get the Dolphin emulator or anything really high-end working on this, but a lot of the 16-bit and 8-bit emulators should work fine, as well as games like Goat Simulator here too, so not too bad of an experience there. And on the 3D Mark Slingshot test, we get a score of 1,262, which is very good for a phone at this price point. If you compare it to the Blue Life 1 X2 that we looked at just a couple of weeks ago, this phone is almost twice as fast, at least insofar as that test is concerned. In a real-world example where you're browsing the web and playing some Goat Simulator or something, you may not notice the difference all that much, but at least in this test where you can see what kind of components make up the phone, it's got some decent specifications and I think will perform quite nicely. But the one thing you have to keep in mind is that when you buy a phone like this from a manufacturer that is not as established and as well known as perhaps a Samsung or an HTC or a Huawei or something, you might run into customer service issues that may not get resolved to your satisfaction down the road. I've already seen in the forums for this phone that there are some folks who are seeing some cracking on the bezel and whatnot and did not get an immediate response from the company. So there is a level of buyer beware here, and I always like to remind people of that because these are phones that look nice and look as nice as many of the other phones out there that cost more, but there is always a cost to be paid on the support side. Now, one of the things that Vernee included in the box with this phone was a note to say that they plan to update the firmware on it every month or two, and in fact, when I took it out of the box and turned it on, even though it was brand new, there was a small firmware update waiting for me when I installed it. However, reading those forums, it also looks like they have disabled the 4K camera that was working on the initial version of the firmware. So I think this product will be continually tweaked and changed as they go along with it, but it is concerning to me that it looks as though a feature was removed that I hope they put back in so we can actually test it here on the channel and have the specifications that they list actually live up to what's inside the phone. So stay tuned. We might come back and revisit this one soon before we give it away, but not a bad value if you are willing to assume some risks. This is Lon.TV, and thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by my Patreon supporters, including gold level supporter Eric. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/Patreon to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.